Tonight, I want us to recenter our attention around this story with a thought. If I could place just an expression in the back of your mind tonight, and that thought would be this: a redefinition of sin. A redefinition, or if you will, a redefining of sin. If you'll bear with me very quickly, we won't be long at all, but just to give you one simple truth tonight as we make our way back into this text tonight. The two sons of this story, the younger son who wastes his life in riotous living, along with his elder brother who, according again to his own testimony, never transgressed the law of his father. These two sons in this story are two paradigms representing two basic kinds or groups of people that strive for happiness and fulfillment inside their life. These two sons become types. They're typical, they're paradigms, they're representations of two kinds of people, two different modes of life, whereby in different extremes, individuals are seeking for happiness and fulfillment in their lives. There is the way of the younger son, the younger brother, which is the way, again, of self-discovery. It is to live how I have always wanted to live, but have not been allowed to live. It is to arrive at a place in your life where you no longer have to give an account to your parents and to the authoritative figures that have been placed over you in your life, where you can finally rebel against everything that you have dreamed of and live your life as you please. There is the way then of self-discovery, and there is the way of moral conformity. Moral conformity is a representation or a type of lifestyle, rather, where a person conforms to the set of moral teachings that he has been brought up to. He is an individual that lives very safely within the confines of the standards and the boundaries and the convictions that have been invested to him by a previous generation. Someone that is careful to live in a manner that is conducive to representing the testimony of his upbringing. The elder brother inside of the story illustrates the path of moral conformity. The Pharisees of Jesus' day believed that they must maintain their place of blessing through strict obedience to the Bible. And this is why we find so many of the descriptive statements in the New Testament in the Gospel records concerning the Pharisees. They were strict, they gave strict observance to the law. They would pray and fast often. They would make sure that they even washed their hands so as to not defile the inside of their body with contaminated, germ-ridden food. They were very scrupulous in every detail of their life. They had broadened the borders of their garments. They wore proudly what is referred to as their phylacteries, which were these stemmed out of the Jewish culture from the Old Testament, bits and pieces of the Word of God attached to their arms or even to their foreheads periodically throughout their day. And Jesus highlighted that they made long pretense of prayer. They would strike certain poses in the corners of the streets and unashamedly lift their voice to heaven and pray as loudly as they could. All of this in an attempt to gain and to keep the blessings of God in their life, which in their personal belief system, the favor and the blessings of God were merited by how well they could perform religiously in their lives. There are many variations of this moral conformity outlook, but they all believe that living by right standards are more important than self-fulfillment. They all believe that living by a set of rules is more important than me experiencing the life that I've always wanted to live. And so the moral conformist will sacrifice his own personal desires to live by a set of strict rules. The problem here really is the attitude, because they believe God's favor is earned by self-sacrifice. They believe that God's favor, that God's blessing, even His presence is earned by their ultimate and great self-sacrifice. The older son says to his father later on inside this story, "Father, look at all I have sacrificed for you. All these years I've been with you, and yet at no time have I ever transgressed." Do you hear the subtones in that? He's saying, I wish I could have, but I couldn't, Father, because I so desired to have your wealth in my life. If I thought I could have lived that way and gotten by with it, I would have, but I have chosen rather, because of my great character, to make the sacrifice for my own personal benefit. The younger brother inside of the parable illustrates the way of self-discovery, or even self-indulgence, if you will. This particular paradigm holds that an individual must break loose from rules and regulations if they are to really embrace life to the fullest. This is the idea of spreading your wings, or sowing your wild oats, or just stretching it out. You're only young once, and live it up large, and have a good time, and just do whatever you want to do in your life. One day you're going to get married, you're going to settle down, and you got the rest of your life to be a good person, and go out and just live it up and enjoy life to the fullest. This is the lifestyle of the self-discovery individuals, those that finally want to know what it's like to live the way they please without anyone's advice being received into their life. In this view, the world would be a better place without standards and expectations. If everyone could just live however they wanted to, and no one said anything to me about my own personal lifestyle. In this worldview, life would be better if I could live without anyone looking down their religious nose at me. In this story, we are given a portrayal of these two entirely separate ways. But the person who chooses the way of moral conformity says this: I'm going to do this. I'm going to live this way because this is how I'm really going to be blessed. This is how I'm going to find my way to ultimate fulfillment and happiness by living according to a strict code. This is how I will find fulfillment in my life. But the person who chooses the way of self-discovery also says, I am going to do what I want without regarding any traditional standards, and this is the way that I'm going to find fulfillment, happiness, and everything that I've ever wanted inside of my life. The attitude of each of these two groups is also hinted at inside of the story. The moral conformist would say that the people who do their own thing are the problems of society, while the immoral would accuse the people that always do the right thing as the problem with the world. Each side would contend, my way is right, your way is wrong. The younger brother, as he goes off into his life of debauchery and immorality, would say as he's walking a great distance from his father's house, my elder brother's stupid for living up underneath those rules. The elder brother would have said simultaneously, as he watches the younger son walk away from everything the father had ever invested into him, he would have said, my younger brother's stupid from walking away from everything that has been invested into our lives. The reality of these two lifestyles actually becomes much more complicated even than this, because it's not always just black and white. It's not always easy enough to say that here's the moral conformist and here's the self-discovery crowd. The reality is that sometimes there's a combination of these two ways inside of the same personality. There are some traditionally moral people that live a secret life in the hog slop. There are some people that put on a shirt and tie and come to church and sing in a choir and say amen at the appropriate times and put money into an offering plate as it comes by. Yet those same individuals live the life of a rebel. They are found sometimes to be in very gross sin. Sometimes even in public fashions, those truths are brought well out into the light. And so you have this blending of the two, where this person that lives seemingly from external vantage points, according to very strict regulations, has veered off course and found really at times to go off into gross sins. And then there are those who live the life of a rebel, but will experiment at times with religion at various intervals inside their life, and they'll give it a shot for a little while, and then they'll go back to their lifestyle, and they'll come back in. And, those are the individuals that sometimes don't mind an invitation to church, and they may come in for 2 or 3 services. They'll give religion a go, and when they don't find really what they're looking for, they kind of go back out into their normal rebellious lifestyle. Inside of this parable, Christ places these 2 lifestyles in simpler terms, though, than a blending of the 2. He places them in terms of either or tonight. That either you are attempting to be a moral conformist where you think you are going to ultimately earn your way into heaven because of how good and how religious you are, or you are an individual who could care less about all of those things, and you're going to live life to the fullest, and you could care less what a preacher or a church or a Bible or even ultimately God has to say about it. In the first part of this story, Jesus gives a depiction of sin that any one of us would recognize at a moment's glance. The younger brother humiliates his father at the outset of this story and lives a life of self-indulgence, immoral, and debauched. He lives a life of fornication. The older brother accuses him later on, verse number 30. He lived his life with harlots. He went off into prostitution rings. He has contaminated his lifestyle. And I say with deep respect, without any tones of blasphemy tonight, God in heaven would have only known what such an individual would have engaged himself in, and what evidences and even consequences are left behind that he will have to deal with the rest of his life for the lifestyle that he has chosen. The younger son, the depiction of sin, really, that we're so familiar with, is totally out of control and is represented in this story as becoming alienated from his father. But the focus inside of this story quickly shifts to the elder brother who is fastidiously obedient to his father. And Jesus seems to really draw the spotlight sin as we come into verse number 25 of this story. And the depiction is presumed from the vantage point of the relationship of the Pharisees and their sacrificial obedience to God. And Jesus is going to really highlight this religious elite crowd by focusing in on the elder's brother and his mentality that he has got the Father wrapped around his finger because he has been such a good and perfect child. Such people seemingly are completely under self-control. They are self-disciplined. They will sacrifice at a moment's notice to do all that is expected out of them. What's surprising to us as we read this story tonight is as we approach the conclusion of this parable. At the conclusion of the story, we are given an unthinkable scenario. And Jesus here, as the storyteller, leaves the elder brother on the outside, being alienated from the father. And the bad son, if you will, has entered into the father's feast and finds full acceptance. The lover of prostitutes has found both forgiveness and salvation. Amen. While at the same time, the man of seeming moral perfection stands condemned and lost. I don't know about you, but in my mind, this is a complete reversal of everything that we've ever been taught. We look at those in our society that carry themselves well, that have never been caught, that know how to tie a tie, that know how to carry a Bible sometimes under their arm, that sit inside of an auditorium like this, and we welcome so many times the likes of those individuals. In fact, as James later on writes his epistle, he is going to highlight the fact that one of the problems of Christianity is that we play favoritism. And we see those come in from higher ranks of society that are more well off to do, and they have larger bank accounts and more potential to be a blessing to the church. And Christianity has oftentimes welcomed its arms and embraced those kinds of individuals, while when those of a more ill repute would come into the congregation or into the assembly, are oftentimes overlooked and not sought after as much. And they're not invested, they're not invited invited out to eat. They're not befriended. No one sits beside them. No one loves on those individuals. And that is the complete opposite mentality from what Jesus is illustrating, both by His own personal example and in the story that is given. Jesus says in a nutshell here, if you want to know the ones that are more likely to receive the gospel, it is those that know what the slop tastes like in the hog pen. In the conclusion of the story, the father invites the elder son to come into the celebration that he has before refused to come into. The question becomes in my mind, why doesn't the elder son just go in? Why not make pretty? Why not just go along to get along? Why doesn't he just go in to the celebration? We find that the older brother does not lose his relationship with the father because he lacks goodness, but he loses his relationship with the father because of his goodness. The reason why the older brother stays on the outside is not because he's so bad. It's not because he's so immoral. It's not because he's covered in tattoos and has the stench of alcohol on his breath. What keeps him from embracing the father's acceptance of him is not his badness, is his overall goodness. He sees himself too good for the father's forgiveness. He would rather work for, earn his investments. It is not his sins in a traditional sense that separate him from the Father. It is his pride and better lived lifestyle that refuses him in his will from going in and celebrating with everyone else. Do you get that? See, we oftentimes portray in a gospel message that it's alcohol that's keeping people from coming to Christ. And it's heroin, it's methamphetamines, and it's an illicit lifestyle. It's illegal, it's crimes, it's unsolicited. It's a world full of darkness and just full of immorality. And those are the vices that so many times grab people. And listen, we're not saying that it doesn't. And for a time it does grab this prodigal, this younger brother. But you want to know what has more of a grip to it? What would damn more souls in the end to an eternity of hellfire is religion.
Yes, right. Man.
It's resolutions. It's look how good and how much I have contributed inside of my lifestyle. Jesus shows then that it is not only the rebellious that are separated from God by their sins. The religious are also separated from Him by their self-righteousness. You know what Jesus highlighted as the reason predominantly for going to hell? Simple unbelief. Simple unbelief. An unwillingness to embrace the truth of Jesus Christ. You know what that entails? It entails me understanding that I have sinned. And that's one thing that the elder brother could not come to grips with. He compared himself with everyone else around him, and he thought he was fine. And if the father wouldn't accept him on those terms, then he did not care to be accepted. The reality is there are those that sit inside of services just like this every week of their lives, and they believe that they deserve God to be good to them because they have been so good to God in their lifestyle. They haven't made a mess, and in their minds, why would Jesus have to go to a cross and die for their sins? Because they just have not been that bad. In their minds, like the elder, they have made the ultimate sacrifice by giving up on some things that they had wanted to do but wouldn't do just because they wanted to earn God's favor and acceptance of them inside their life. Here's the problem. It's the attitude. It's the attitude. You see, tonight, if you're bent towards sin, if that's really what you would like to do, if you could get away with it, then there's more problems inside of your life than the person homeless on Slocum Street tonight. If you would love to do those things and just can't find a way to do them and still have the prestige of society that you crave, your problems go deeper than a fifth of liquor. Your problems go deeper than an immoral lifestyle. Neither are justifiable, and neither are ways in and of themselves to gain the Father's love and compassion inside of our lives. Understanding, I believe, this tonight would help us that God does not owe any of us anything, and His blessings cannot be earned. And it doesn't matter at the end of the day how religious we are. Covering up the real intentions and thoughts of our heart will never suffice on the day of judgment. Pretending to be better than we really are is never going to cut it when it comes to the day of judgment. We are not going to fool God. In many regards, we can't even fool our parents. You can't even fool your pastor and your Sunday school teacher. How do you hope to fool the very God of heaven who knows the thoughts and the intents of our hearts? It can't be accomplished. Tonight we may keep ourselves at bay from God by pointing to all of our sacrifices. Or we may draw close to Him by confessing our unworthiness. And in this parable, its abrupt closure tells us this one central truth: that the next play of the game is placed in our hands, so to speak. Tonight, what I would wonder is, would there be someone here who would have clung prior to coming into this service tonight to their own goodness and their own merit? And would they say in some regard tonight, I am a good enough person for God to accept just as I am? And maybe tonight my hope and my expectation to be, by looking again at this story, that you would have come supernaturally to the realization that good enough will never be good enough. That we have all sinned against God. And the very thought that we're good enough tends itself to pride, which is one of the sins that God is said to hate. Tonight, our prayer would be that no one would leave this place trusting in their own good works for salvation, but that you would turn from your own wickedness and come and embrace the Savior for the only way that you could hope to be forgiven. Let's stand tonight for prayer.